A very good evening to everyone. Today, I welcome you all to the webinar on the topic, Helping Your Child Develop a Lifelong Love of Reading. Let me start by a quote by Ernest Hemingway. It says, "There is no friend as loyal as a book." Today, we have with us as speakers, Rashmi Narzary, Sahitya Academy Awardee for English Children's Literature for her book, His Share of Sky. She is a creative writer, writer mentor, columnist, and a freelance editor. Welcome, Rashmi.
Hi.
We have with us Usha Venkataraman, an award-winning international performance storyteller. She is the founder and creative director, Mumbai Storytellers Society. She has joined us all the way from Mumbai. Hi, Usha.
Hi there. Hello.
We have with us Abhijit Goswami and Bedabrat Kalita. Abhijit is the CEO of BOOKBELL, a printing and publishing house, and Bedabrat is the head sales and marketing's BOOKBELL. Welcome you both on board.
Good evening.
Hi. Hi.
Reading is important because it develops our thoughts, open up our minds, give us endless knowledge. The more we read, the more we understand the world around us, and books take us into a world that is beyond what we already know. My first question to Usha is, how can one plant the seed to reading?
Thank you, Vasavvi. And I warmly welcome you all for this evening session. And how do you plant the seeds and how do you nurture it? There is no magical formula. In simplest terms, the magic is spending time with your child. And the primary caregiver are the parents or the grandparents. So the more time you spend with your child will foster reading, which it will also inspire the child to read. Now, how do we go about it? Everyone thinks that learning to read is a very complex process. It is, and it starts actually at birth, but I would say it starts at the fetal stage. If you go back to our own epics, Prahlad knew about the Lord's name Narayana because his mother would chant that name and Narad would be telling stories to his mother. So reading, listening starts at the fetal stage. And to define what is reading, reading is the process of deriving a meaning from the printed word. Now, how do we derive that? So there is a process. Let's start from the beginning when the child is just about a month old or when it's born. So the mother's interaction or the father's interaction, today you have both the parents interacting, talking to the child, singing to the child, spending time with the child, actually fosters reading. You don't know what is actually happening, but the child is learning all about the code of language. So spend more time with your child, talk to your child, listen to your children. Now, like I said, there is no magical formula. What you can do is you can start with singing songs, simple nursery rhymes. You know, when you're feeding the baby, when the baby is just about 3 months old, you could be singing a nursery rhyme and the baby is actually listening. And then you slowly progress to these books which you have, the plastic or the chewable books for children, which just have an image on them. So you can show the image. Now, the process of reading is also gaining meaning from the context, that is the illustrations, from the pictures first. So then the child is able to predict the content. So if there is a picture, say the cow says moo, and you show a picture of a cow, so there is a connection. So that is the context of an illustration of a book. Picture books work very well with very young kids. And then what you go on is, you, like I said, you start singing a lot of nursery rhymes. You do stories which have a musical element in it. And then slowly go on to finger stories. Now, finger stories foster reading, foster the language arts, and it's very easy because for the child to, you know, look at you and then to kind of move or imitate or mirror the image. It's great fun. But the earliest story that a child listens to is a nursery rhyme. So nursery rhymes are the earliest stories. Being a storyteller, I come from the background that stories definitely foster reading. There's nothing to beat storytelling. So, but what kind of storytelling would you do at a very young age? So the story is something that engages that age, the child. The attention capacity is very small. So it could be just a 2-line song that you sing to the child. And the child responds. And then will immediately, that there is a perking up of interest. And then as the interest wanes, because after all, it's just a 3-month, 4-month-old baby or a 6-month-old baby, then you kind of, progress to something else. And as the child grows, you start interacting with the child with more stories and songs, which have repetitive words in them. Children love repetitive words, so they actually ask for it. So I would say, the main ingredient for planting, for, raising a reader is to spend more time. It's only the parents. The kind of environment that you provide, where you are constantly engaging with your toddler, constantly talking or listening to your toddler, that is very important. And also, encouraging your toddler to speak. Children love that. They are just learning the language. So the more you speak to them, the more they are going to talk. And definitely the early stages of reading is telling stories, like I said. So the stories can be a call and response story, participatory stories. It can be repetitive words in the story. So those things help, or showing an image to the child and then taking it away. Maybe, doing it with a puppet and taking that away will also enhance their reading skills. Everyone usually thinks that a child starts to read by the time the child goes to a kindergarten or grade 1. Not at all. I think as young as 2 months, 3 months, a child can read. Now, I'll tell you how. I've personally experienced. By printing the word, suppose you have a book in hand, and if you just print BOOK and then just show it to the child can recognize the print, but doesn't know the letters and the word, but can recognize the print. So you can slowly start, and as the child grows into a toddler, you could play this word detective game, printing words outside, say the kitchen, the door, fan, window, cupboard, toilet, shelf. So things like that, the child recognizes the print and understands what it is and will imitate you, and also, call out and say that, okay, this is the door, this is the kitchen. And you'll be surprised that 1-year-old children who can talk as early as 8 months can just say kitchen. You see, it's because it's not that it knows what those letters and alphabets are actually saying, but it can recognize print. And engaging, another way that you can engage with your youngster is you can, start cooking. You can cook with your child, and there you engage in a conversation about if you're making, say, even a simple thing as a vegetable, you can a sandwich. You can talk about the vegetables that you're taking, the cutting or the measuring, and butter, cheese, pepper, salt. So that is another way that you can get your child to start on the process of reading. And also, how do you promote the early literacy? The early literacy is first you tell or read aloud. The child is listening, comprehending, and then assimilating the information, and then trying to scribble something if you provide them with papers and crayons. And so that actually happens as you keep on talking to the child. And the talking medium can be telling a small story, singing a story, musical storytelling, or a participatory story. For example, when you sing a nursery rhyme like row, row, row your boat gently down the stream, if you see a crocodile, don't forget to scream. So actually, there is a language development happening. There is another story which I do with very young kids is, there was an old woman who swallowed a fly. I don't know why she swallowed a fly. Perhaps she'll
die.
She will cry. So no, I don't say die. Say
Okay.
she will cry. So the next is, there was an old woman who swallowed a spider that wriggled and jiggled and tickled inside her. So you see, there is a rhyming, there is a repetition of the words, and she swallowed the spider to catch the fly. So there is a sequence happening. In case I forget the spider and I go on to bird, there was an old lady who swallowed a bird. How absurd. Okay, now there is a language development taking place. How absurd. Suppose I skip the spider, the child will ask you, no, where is the spider? Where is the spider? So that is how the earliest reading process starts, with these repetitive songs or repetitive stories, or a musical storytelling, like if you have, the mitten story. So it says, it's frosty cold out here in the snow. I'm going to get into that mitten where it's nice and warm. They can easily pick up songs. Children are like sponges. So the one formula that I can say is, spend time with your child. Nothing like listening, talking, engaging in conversations, doing a lot of activities, taking your child, say, to visit the market, or to visit the beach, or go to the museum, or to the zoo. There is a lot of language development taking place. And then you could do a related story about the animal, and then that's how. And then you have this rebus reader. So I think you must be knowing where this, say, the cat. Now the child knows the cat in the picture. Cat, and there is a blank. There you will have either a ladder, the tree. So the cat climbed the tree. So the child will be able to do that once you engage him with this rebus reading, where you have a picture instead of a word. And then, and the more you speak, the child actually starts talking, because he's emulating you, he's imitating you, he's watching you. And then he says, okay, this is how I'm also supposed to talk. So I had this personal experience. My daughter was very young and she had older cousins who were already going to kindergarten and they were talking fluently in English. And she was just basically learning the language. But not to be outdone, she started singing all the nursery rhymes that she knew. So it became like she is fluent in the language, you see. And the child wants to be fluent, and he sees that fluency actually of that story in the book. And then we come to the book. You can show the book, show and tell, but I would still go that telling a story, talking to the child, is the basic step towards fostering early literacy.
Right. So that was very, very elaborately explained. And I think this gives us a true picture because when you talked about story, saying a story, that is how even I picked up my reading habit from my grandpa, who used to tell us a lot of stories, and that always used to interest us. So that is how, we also picked up the reading habit gradually after listening to his stories and finding, different things to think about. So it just broadens and opens your mind, and you want to seek more. That is what makes you a reader, a voracious reader. So coming to Rashmi, my question for you is, do you think there might be a connect between academic reading and non-academic reading? Does one support the other?
Yeah, thank you, Vasavvi. I definitely think there is a connect between academic reading and non-academic reading because you see, uh, non-academic reading holds your interest and it kind of holds your attention span for some time. And that kind of gradually gets into a habit, which again, the child can put into academic reading. That is one thing. And then I'll tell you about the core skills of reading, where I take C for connect, and that connect is between the academic and the non-academic reading. I'll give you an instance, like Usha was talking about nursery rhymes. So there again, I'll come back to nursery rhymes. Say a child just learned in school about Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. The rest is, of course, we all know, I'll not go into it. So the connect there is the child sees the star and he wants to know more about it. The child has learned about the star in a book. If the parent or some teacher or anyone, the guardian, takes the child to see outside, to look at the stars in the sky up, so the child sees that these are stars that twinkle, there's a flicker in the stars, and then which flicker the child did not see in the book. So there is a connect between the academic and the natural. So the child will like to know more about stars. Why is it flickering? Why is it blinking at me? Why is it twinkling? Well, we say twinkle, twinkle, little star, but I don't see the star twinkling in the book, but I see it twinkling up in the sky. So when that happens, maybe the parents or the teachers can induce and help the child to read more about stars in some non-academic books. So there a connect is formed between the academic and the non-academic. And then when I talk of core skills, C is for the connect, O is for the observation. So then the observation goes to nature, like we just gave an example of the stars in the sky, and then we can also go in for observational example of, say, behavior. That would be behavior in human, behavior in pet animals at home, outside, on the street, in nature, in the wild. So there is a connect, then we go to observation, and then next alphabet in the core skills is R, which is again for retention. So when a child reads something which really interests him and which is not maybe part of his academics, he learns his retention capacity, which again he can put to use in his or her academic reading. So he can sit down for a longer span of time and he can retain whatever the child is reading in that span of time. And then again, the last alphabet in the core skills is E. So that is again for expression. So the child can express very well what he has connected between the academic and the non-academic, what he has observed in nature, in behavioral patterns in humans and animals, and then he has retained in his mind, and now he would like to express it. So whether he expresses it in terms of answers in questions in school, or he expresses it in the form of writing or storytelling later on. So that is one point. And then when we talk of retention, retention also helps in developing the child's inquisitive mind. When you retain one thing and then after some other reading, you retain something else, you try to build a connect between the two different objects or subjects that the child had retained in his mind. So then he or she tries to bring a connect between the two. And somewhere along that connect, along that bridging between the academic and the non-academic, we see that there is a support system. One supports the other. See, a child learns about the Bermuda Triangle, which is not part of his academic, but then there he gets to learn about the tectonic plates, which again, probably later on in academics, he will learn in some subject or the other. So then definitely there is a support between the two. And when we talk of observation, we also talk of observation outdoors or indoors. Maybe the child is observing the fan go, slow sometimes and fast sometimes. And why does that happen? There's a regulator to it. So, that he will observe and he will retain. And maybe later on when he begins to write or begins to narrate something, he can connect the bridge, he can connect it, and then, that it was, summer wasn't too harsh, so the fan was going slow. So that narration, that expression is a result of his connect between the academic and the non-academic. And this is what I call the core skills. I'll just sum up once again. C is for the connect between the academic, the non-academic, the observational capacity. O is for the observation, and R is for the child's retention capacities, and E is for the expression of all that he has connected, observed, and retained.
Right. So yeah, that's a wonderful, summing up of the connection of the academic and non-academic reading, because a lot many times we have seen parents really promoting academic reading in terms of read your course book, read your complete your syllabus and stuff. But again, there is not much stress on the non-academic reading part. Many a times we see that. And well, when we talk about storytelling, and storytelling is a wonderful art, and Usha is a veteran in that. So Usha, would you want to elaborate a bit more on how storytelling can lead to reading skills, I think Usha is muted. Just a moment.
Yes.
Yeah, fine. I think we can hear you now.
Thank you so much. Sorry about that. Storytelling is unparalleled. I just want here to quote the often quoted quote of Einstein's: if you want your child to be brilliant, tell them stories. If you want them to be more brilliant, tell them more stories. So that is the premise that I'm going to be talking for the next few minutes. Nothing to compete with storytelling. It promotes early literacy. So I'm just going to list what storytelling does in the areas of what all it, enhances or develops. So storytelling actually boosts the development of the child. Now, the development can be his listening skill, his sequencing skill, his auditory skills, his comprehension, all that. Okay, and then communication. He is learning this magic code, the secret code as to how adults are communicating. How are they talking? So stories provide that it is a way to communicate an idea. And language. So it fosters language development. Like I said, repetitive things like row, row, row your boat across the icy river. If you see a polar bear, don't forget to shiver. There is a language development. Icy river, that's where polar bears come from. And then you shiver because it's cold. So it's the same nursery rhyme, but the way they have adapted the language fosters language development. Then creative writing, because the more you listen to a story, you get ideas, your imagination unfolds, which is very important for writing. And you also understand that a story has a definite beginning, a middle, and an end. So you understand that if you have to write, it would include all these things. So your visual imagery comes from listening to a story, because the story paints a visual imagery. So it helps in writing. And then definitely reading, because when you've heard a story, you want to get your hands on the story. Now, not only do we want our children to read, but we want to encourage them to want to read. They have to want to read. How do you do that? By telling stories, and it could be a read aloud story from a book, definitely. So then the child understands the mechanics of reading. They understand of turning page, that things flow from left to right, and then how there is a pause, and then you turn the page, and then if there is a full stop. If you see Karadi Tales audio books have all these, there is a little sound which goes, and then you turn the page. I remember that about 25 years back when I started, I saw them. I thought that was a wonderful way for them to encourage, and also teach them the mechanics of reading. And then concentration. Now, I wouldn't do a story or a song for more than 3 minutes for a little 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, because there is no concentration. But it also builds concentration as you keep telling stories. And then imagination and the emotional development. So what happens is, when you listen to a story, you understand how the character is coping with an emotional, it could be an emotional occurrence in the story, or it could be, say, when little Sophie gets angry. So I used to wonder, how would children express anger? When I was dealing with not even toddlers, I think 9 months to 2 years of age, I was handling that group. So I really didn't know how would one do that. So, but I had another wonderful mentor, and Kavita Anand, who runs Adhyayan today. So Kavita would say, how would you express? So the child would go to the corner and stand there. I'm very angry. So, angry means you're being punished. You have to go to a corner. But does he understand what anger is all about? No. Then I came across this story. What happens when Sophie gets angry? She doesn't get a toy, but she gets angry and she needs to express. So she screams loudly. Her face is mottled red, her... It's like, whole face, whole body is shaking with anger. But then what she does is she runs outside. She runs in the garden, runs around till she's tired and sits under a tree. And then she calms down, and then she looks and she hears the birds. She can see the trees. She can see the slight breeze. She can see the little dry leaves fluttering in the wind. And she calms down and then comes back. So even as adults, we have to express our anger. How do we express it? Either you learn an art and then where you're, punching your hand, punching the bag, or you're, doing a strenuous physical exercise so that you release all those pent-up emotions. So a story also, there is an emotional development of the child, because if I tell the story of why Sophie got angry and how did she deal with her anger, a child understands. So there is an emotional development taking place. So stories have the power to bring about a change. They actually can bring about a change. So it's not only for children, but even for adults. But now that we are talking about children, there are different ways of telling stories. Like I said, if you want to create a lifelong reader, tell them stories. And there are different stories. Like I said earlier, it could be musical story, nursery rhymes, finger story, wiggling your finger. And there is a beautiful West African tale of each finger saying something. So the child also is developing its small motor skills. And these are call and response, repetitive. They have to repeat after you. If I say, the little one says, I am hungry. So you expect the child, and that's how the child's language development also takes place. And then reading aloud, either sitting down with a book and then telling that story, and words which have these repetitive things, like, Karadi Tales, I think Karadi Tales, one of the books is about Kutti and the mouse. So there the description is the modak. Amma made modak. She filled it with coconut, oozing with jaggery and flavored with cardamom. Now, when I'm telling the story, if I forget to say, the child will immediately tell you what was inside the modak, because it wants that same repetitive thing. So there a language development is taking place, filled with coconut, oozing with jaggery, flavored with cardamom. And repetitive words like the little rabbit walked a bit, skipped a bit, and ran a bit. Repeating words, the early books, most of the books are that. And since I'm a storyteller, I don't read from a book, I tell stories. So the book is put away and I'm telling them different kinds of stories. So if they want to come along with me, it'll be a participatory story, like the old man woke up and he stretched, he got out of bed, he opened the door, and then he walked out, kissed his wife goodbye, and stepped out of the house, and he walked on the pavement. So you show movement, and then walked through the long grass, and then climbed a bridge. Right. And then he came to a hill and he climbed up the hill. When he reached the top, he panted and he looked down and he saw his wife standing at the door. He waved to her. Then he went down the hill. He goes faster. Then he comes to a little pond and he starts swimming. So children learn by this, and it's a sequence, a story which has a sequence, what comes after this action. And they want to hear the same story again and again, right? So I'm sure there are enough books in the market. There are some wonderful books which are, engaging every level of the reader. Say there are books for a 2-year-old, books for 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. And also another wonderful way to engage them to read and to talk is to spin stories with your child. Make up stories. Now you can provide props like puppets and other props there, because that also enhances the storytelling or even reading. They could just pick up a prop and then become this magical fairy, who is traveling in her broom. So it could be just a little stick, and then, or provide a child with a talking stick. Even adults love it. So it's a talking, like suppose this is a bangle. You're holding that and you're telling. It gives you some kind of security and confidence. So you can provide a talking stick to a child and get the child to talk. So
Right.
these are, stories are very important to create lifelong readers. So in the early years, it is storytelling, listening to stories that makes you a
Reader.
good reader.
Great reader. So when we are talking about books, Usha, and yes, the different modes of storytelling. We use story charts in our schools. We
Mm.
use puppet. We do the circle time stories, and also the bare bone stories. So children, they keep telling their own, adding a bit to it. So when you're talking about books, let me ask Abhijit and Bedabrat this question that. Do you think that in today's day and age of electronics, when children are so much into gadgets and mobile phones and XYZ,
Mhm.
do you as publisher find any challenge in the trends of publishing market, more particularly in lines with children books?
Thank you, Dr. Vasavvi. Actually, there are challenges that we are facing as a publishers. There are many organizations, those who are actually working more to help people reading books. National Book Trust is one such organization that runs specially designed buses taking books to the remotest village in the country. Such NGOs should come out in more numbers. Secondly, the new generation writers should come up with excellent and interesting subjects and choose print as a medium to bring to the people. And my suggestion there to the corporate houses as well, that corporate houses should help the new generation writers financially as well as a social responsibility so that it will motivate new writers to come up with new ideas. We all will be glad to know that the sale of print books in e-commerce sites have tremendous growth in last year. We urge companies engage with e-commerce business to promote books and to keep more and more interesting collections in their sites. And very important, Dr. Vasavvi, as a parents, we can play a very important role to increase the love towards the print book regarding reading among their children. Avoid electronic gadgets at home for reading. Pick up a small books instead. I'm sure this will increase more print book readings habit within our children and adult as well. So
Right.
yeah, that's what I feel like. There are lucrative market. There are lucrative market.
There's a way of increasing
Correct.
the
There are many ways
book
of increasing
book sales in terms of sales happen when there is an interest to read, right?
interest rates.
So
Yes.
we go to the book fairs. I see young children selecting books and yes, buying their books, anything that they want to read. So even I've seen schools, my son's school, they every time there is a PFM, they put out beautiful books for the children, and it's always a after the PFM we run to that corner and buy a few reads for our children. So that is another way of encouraging the reading habit. So coming to Rashmi, Rashmi is muted, so you have to unmute yourself, Rashmi. So coming to your question is
Okay,
see
can you
when
hear me?
yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay.
All right. So reading can culminate to a writing habit because you are a voracious reader and you are a writer. So today, even somebody who's a reader and uh, thinks of taking up a profession, which is about creative writing or writing a book or something. So that, what is the, how would it lead to that, culminate to that kind of a setting? I mean, from a reader to a writer. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, thank you, Vasvi. This is a multi-pronged aspect, of reading and writing as well, because it is not just about reading and writing getting inculcated into a habit and then leading to career options like, say, um, authoring books, or maybe being an editor, or maybe content writer, script writer. you don't have a dearth of professions nowadays. But what I'd like to say is that not only are these total and absolute professions on their own, but reading and writing is also required for other professions. I'll give you an example once again from my very own family. My daughter, she's a doctor by profession, but then when she has to take a history of her patients, she has to know their language, she has to communicate. And in that communication, there is some amount of reading and understanding, because the patients will be from a very multiple background. Their kind of communication will be different. So for everything, there is an understanding of communication. And when communication is to be understood, there definitely has to be some amount of reading. Whereas people will think, why would an MBBS require some amount of reading? Or why would, engineer for that matter, or a mathematician require some amount of reading? But very simple and very basic thing is that if you understand the question, will you be able to write your answer? You will be able to read your project and present them. If you cannot, if you're not adept at reading, if you're not adept at expressing yourself, you're not going to do well at it. You might be having an amazing blueprint of an amazing project, but when it comes to presentation, you're not being able to express it properly. Why? Because you had a dearth of reading in some time in your childhood. That is one thing. And reading is also into reading and writing together. You cannot isolate one from the other. And there is a very thin line of differentiation between the two. So there is, I told you already, career options, varied career options. So it is not that parents should go for the fact, for the feeling that why should someone go for something so useless as reading when it can just go as, you can just push it off as a pastime. But I'm sorry, reading is not just a pastime. It definitely is a passion, but you cannot just shove it aside, nudge it aside as a pastime. It definitely has great and charming career options. So I would definitely suggest parents to please encourage your kids to read and take up writing, because writing again is into journalism, into editing. Like I told you, so many, the options are innumerable. Right. And then when we go out for workshops and all, this is one thing we tell the kids. We give them the capacity to imagine things, observe and imagine, and then express themselves. We give them props like, say, a setting prop, character props, genre props. When we say genre props, we say, we give you this character, this backdrop, and then we say comedy. So in these two genres, the child will have to create a kind of story, which probably some parents might think, why is this at all necessary? But we feel this is really necessary, because later on, if the child goes ahead into a career of journalism, so he knows he gets a backdrop of a riot or whatever. He gets characters of the riotees or the authorities, and then he has to create a report on it. How does the child do it? So the child goes back to his childhood workshops, creative writing workshops. He picks up the bits from there, and this is how the habit of reading and writing culminates into something useful, something which the child can use later as a career.
Right. Very, very, this is actually very interesting and important because we have seen
And
so
yes,
many young writers
may I please
now.
interrupt,
Yeah.
Vasavvi? I told you about my daughter, and then I also just recently got to know my son who is pursuing law. So one would again feel like, why would a lawyer need to study something like English or history? But he is having to do projects now on English and history. So this is it. There is a culmination of everything, every subject. Yes.
Definitely.
Can I just answer Rashmi? Just that when you spoke about law is all about persuasive storytelling.
Right.
That's it.
Absolutely.
That's it. Yes,
Absolutely. I'm
yes.
a lawyer. I'm a non-practicing lawyer, so I I know that
Yes,
very
there is a culmination of
well.
everything.
Yeah.
You cannot isolate one subject from the other, and
Right.
that's where the importance of reading comes in. Whatever the subject, whatever you pursue, reading has to be there. It is
Yes.
like, you're planning to become a sailor, so I don't need to learn how to run. It's not that.
It's not there.
Yeah.
Right. So I would ask Abhijit and Bedabrat, give me two basic points, just 2 points would do, which you consider before printing, publishing any individual author's book, because you've been publishing very good books. So what are 2 points that you look into?
There are many, but as you say, there are to give two important points. I personally feel as a publisher that first point is who is the writer, what is his background, and the second most important thing is what is the subject. Actually, as a publisher, we also have a social responsibility towards the society. So what we see that as a responsibility, how a book is going to help people as well. So these are the two basic points what we look into before publishing someone's book: the author and the subject.
And the
And also
subject,
there are many, and also there are many, but
many
these are the
others,
main two
but
factors.
main
These are
two
the two
points.
main two factors. Yeah.
Yes. So I think we are almost at the end of this session, but before we wind up, I think there are two questions, and I'll be reading both of those questions. One is for probably Rashmi and the other for Usha. But before I do so, I would like to announce our upcoming webinar on Wednesday, 29th April at from 4 to 4:45. And the topic would be delivering next generation fitness experience at home for kids. The speakers who join us are Sukalpa Das and Franco Parakya, fitness trainers, and they're fitness experts, and Magdalena and Vitol, founders, Natural Born Leaders. They would be joining us. So we look forward to meeting you again on next Wednesday. So my question to Usha, which has come from Meha, I guess, that is Meha's question to Usha, where we tell stories to our kids, then to our kid, then he likes to narrate one himself. His stories are often too long. How should we respond to these never-ending stories? Usha is muted. You have to unmute yourself. Usha, your mic. Yeah.
When you the one who is asking me this question, children love to go on and on when they're spinning their own tail, because they will go from one to another and to another. So be a patient listener. Okay, the child is hearing his or her own voice, and it is magical to that child. You can never experience what the child is going through, but sometimes, because we have to be socially conscious as well, suppose it's happening in the classroom or it's happening when there are other kids around, I think you may have to step in gently and say, so maybe let's take a pause here, let's take a break and come back to his adventures, uh, you know, after some time, or tomorrow. Let's talk about so and so's adventure tomorrow. But you have to be very gentle, at the same time firm, and you can do it. So that's the way. Otherwise, the stories will be never ending. You know, it'll go on, and the child also has to understand. So, or you can ask, so what happened? Can you finish your story? Because when a child is listening to you or when you're reading aloud, it knows that the child knows exactly that there is a beginning, there is a middle, and there is an end. So the comprehension is happening in the head. So you'll have to tell the child, so how would you like to end the story? Right? So
Right.
you
Absolutely.
have to be a gentle nudge and a facilitator. Yeah.
Right. There's a question for Rashmi. It's by Sheetal Vora. With a schedule that secondary children have, and academic reading is given the first choice, then to non-academic reading, any ideas of how to balance the both?
This is a very tricky question because, yes, even I have had children who have just crossed the threshold of the 12th. So, but, they will still find time because in between that academic and the non-academic, there will be subjects of interest common to both. So when supposing you learn of one, I would say, something about chemistry. When we learn something about chemistry, a particular acid, or I don't know, because I'm not a student of chemistry. So when, when the child learns something about it, and probably whatever is in the textbook is not enough to quench the child's thirst of his knowledge. So, however, the child will come back home and take a book and look up the subject for a better concept. And if he doesn't find it, he will probably look up any place online. So there is no dearth of online storehouse of knowledge. So, however, somehow or the other, he will find some connect between the academic and the non-academic. He will definitely not have time. And in some cases, even parents might be telling the child, okay, keep away those books now, get back to your academics. But within that non-academic, there is something which the child relates to his academic. So it's all right, there will be time for that. And when a child finds time for some WhatsApping, some Instagramming, some Facebooking, then why can't the child find some time for non-academic pursuance of the same topic that is being pursued in his academics, in his
Right. And I think parents have a great role to play in this, because I've fixed up a reading time for my son. So he has to read at that time, and it's a habit. Reading comes as a habit at one point of time, and
Then
it's
from
like,
one point of time, even if you don't tell the child not to, you don't remind the child to read, it is a habit, so he will
it's a
get back
habit.
to reading.
Yes.
He will come
And
back.
like we, when we kind of, make it a habit, we need to practice it at times. So this is reading comes with even practice. Sometimes, you need to have that. One question for Rashmi, but I think you need to, you can type that answer because you had very elaborately talked about it. Jayan Garg says that, ma'am, I can't understand academic and non-academic reading. So probably
Okay.
you can type your answer there, because you had explained it properly, but probably Jayan did not get it.
Okay.
So I think we are, I think it's time we wind up our session. And this has been a extremely, a very good session. I really loved listening to Usha, Rashmi, and Bedabrat and Abhijit. And I guess all the attendees, there might be more questions coming in, so we'll answer that. We'll type out the answers. And thanks a lot. Thanks for being with us as panelists. And I thank all the attendees for attending this session. And we look forward to more, because we are having a series of webinars. We'll keep coming from, every Wednesday and Saturdays with more. And thanks, Usha, Rashmi, Abhijit, and Vedabrat.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Vasavvi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
team.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.